Shaw, and I'm a classical pianist. Shall I play some Bach? Yeah. Oh, terrific. Turn the piano on first. All right, here we go. Classical piano my entire life. It's inside of me. I think about it all the time. Well, actually, I think about my hair all the time. Does it look okay? Yeah. I just got it cut. Anyway, even before I was in kindergarten, I was plunking away at the keys. And because I come from a musical family, it was assumed I would take piano lessons. One of my first teachers had bright orange hair and smoked cigarettes during my lessons. But I got to play great pieces with descriptive names, like Country Gardens. And all of my music books had pictures in them, so I would oftentimes make up stories. This one has a Victorian Currier and Ives looking picture of people ice skating, wearing long red velvet coats lined with white fur and calling out to each other, "You! You!" And then I loved the Cossack dance. I can still see the Cossacks marching on the Russian steppes. Playing the piano was so much fun, and if I messed up, it was okay. When I was 7 years old, my mom and I were in the waiting room of my pediatrician, and what do I see on the table but a New Yorker magazine? I opened it up and it said, "Goings on about town." And there were listings for music concerts at Carnegie Hall and theater plays on Broadway. I mean, what kind of amazing place was this? New York City. I didn't even know where New York was, but I wanted to be there, not here. And by here, I mean Pueblo, Colorado. On the prairie, between the Rocky Mountains and the Arkansas River, smack dab right in the middle of nowhere. Pueblo was called the Pittsburgh of the West. Because the main industry was the steel mill. But Colorado people called it the armpit of the West. Because the whole area reeked of this metallic, rotten egg smell. My grandparents, my mother's parents, lived by the mill, and it was awful. Thank goodness we lived on the other side of town, and we'd drive past the Rainbow Bread Factory, where you could smell freshly baked bread. This is where I grew up, and this is what I practiced. Our poor old piano was so beat up and beyond repair. So my folks splurged and ordered a new piano from back east. Well, we called any place east of the Mississippi River back east. So much better. This is Bach. I never studied technique. And by technique, I mean scales and arpeggios and the dreaded Hanon exercises. These were all designed to strengthen our fingers and to teach us patterns. But because I didn't have any technique, my little itty-bitty fingers trying to push down the heavy, gigantic piano keys. I never played any recitals, and I never had to memorize my music. But I could play any music put down in front of me. And I loved musical theater. Like Oklahoma, or The Sound of Music. And then, Jesus Christ Superstar came out. And I've had so many men before, and very many ways. He's just one more. I was 12. I'd hate it when we'd go visit my parents' friends, and my mom would turn to me and say, Cynthia, why don't you play something for us? And I'd be like, no, I don't have my music with me, and I don't have anything memorized because my brain isn't big enough to hold all of the notes. But music was my shining star. And yet I always felt like I wasn't good enough and no one wanted to listen to me. You see, my family was divided into two groups. My mom, Jessie, my sister, who played the flute, and me in one group, and my dad, who played jazz trombone, in another group. He played in cabarets, bars, strip joints, places we couldn't go. He was this distant god. He was quiet, smart, creative, playful, always designing and building things. He was calm and cool and non-emotional, like my mom was very emotional. But he was always by himself, doing everything by himself. So while Jessie and I practiced our classical pieces and played our flute and piano duets together, my dad was off doing his own thing. He never listened to us, he never encouraged us, and we three never made music together. In fact, it was like 10 years ago when I realized that musical families play together, like all the time. I mean, the Von Trapp family did, the Carter family, even the Partridge family on TV. Everybody, not us. My dad only played with this blind jazz pianist, Leon Dudley. And so as a kid, I thought, well, Daddy doesn't play with me because I'm not blind. You know, kid thinking, making up excuses for adults. So, plus, he played jazz. So, I didn't play jazz. So jazz was like his territory. So my mom took us to our lessons and made sure we practiced, but her support didn't mean as much to me because she wasn't a musician. And she resented my father's music making and his lack of involvement in our family life. She so desperately wanted him to be in our world, and he wasn't. And it was all music's fault. And even when we were together, we weren't together. Like, one time my mom convinced him on a Sunday afternoon to take us all to the Sand Dunes National Park. So as she and my sister Jessie and I climbed the dunes, laughing and having a really great time, my dad was in the parking lot, standing outside the car in his good shoes, smoking a cigarette, waiting for us to finish. I mean, I do have sweet daddy memories, like the time that he taught me how to do a 2 against 3 rhythm at the dinner table. Hey, you know what? Why don't you all join me and I'll teach you, all right? So get your hands ready, here we go. So first, one hand, we'll do a 3 rhythm, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, that's really good. Now you add the 2 to it. So 1, ready, go. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Hey, that's pretty good. Bravo, give yourself a hand. So now, when you go home tonight, you too will be able to play the Debussy Arabesque. By the time I was in high school, I was busy with my friends and school, and I auditioned for our high school production of Fiddler on the Roof for the role of Golda. Do you love me? Of course, they couldn't hear me. But I was determined. So after everybody finished auditioning, I asked to audition again. Do you love me? And they did, and I got the part. I also sang in choir, and sometimes we'd smoke joints before concerts. And then we'd look at each other in that knowing marijuana way. If our director, Mr. Butcher, had known, he would have killed us. He always encouraged us to get high on life, kids. Get high on life. But mostly, I got high on music. So as I played my classical piano and sang, my dad sometimes played gigs with jazz guys from my high school class. Guys I knew. I was jealous. I wanted him to play with me. But I played classical. I mean, would he play with me if I played jazz? Honestly, I don't think so. Because Daddy had always wanted to play with the Air Force Academy Jazz Band, the Falconeers, the crown jewel of the military. But he got scared and nervous, and he never auditioned. So he stayed in Pueblo, got married, and had kids. So even though I know he loved us, his music always came first. At nighttime, I would hear my parents arguing. My mom's shouts, my dad's silence. It got so bad that my mom ran off to the mountains, her purse full of pills. My dad was frantic. Thankfully, she came back. Whispering home, oh, how gentle thy voice, making my heart in its sorrow rejoice. That's Whispering Hope, an old Victorian song. My grandmother Mimi, my dad's mom, taught it to Jesse and me when we were kids. She had been a silent movie pianist in Oklahoma, but had made a bad marriage to my grandfather, and ultimately checked out with nervous breakdowns and pills. Running away. Everyone was always running away, wishing they were someplace else. And I guess that was easier than stating what it was that you really wanted or expressing your feelings. If you did that, people might get mad at you, and then they'd abandon you. I watched an O. Henry story on TV about a man who gave up his life to save his friend. I was so touched that I cried. But my mom got mad at me. She said crying was out of control and dangerous. Family feelings were so under wraps that if there was even the slightest crack in the happy family veneer, anger and rage would uncontrollably flow out. I didn't want that. So I closed up. My mom told me I was a cold fish, but I just felt like a beautiful box on the outside, but empty on the inside. I mean, not that I thought I was physically beautiful, because I did not think that at all. I felt like my insides and outsides didn't match. And I just wanted my dad to listen. I wrote this poem in 2nd grade. Look in the mirror. Look very hard. Look for the person your mind may guard. Is it the person you truly want to be? Or is it only the person lovely to see? Time passes. I was determined to get away and was accepted into college at the University of Denver as a piano major. We really couldn't afford this expensive private school, and my dad said, well, why does she need to go there? Why can't she just go out at the college? It's good enough. But my mom understood, and she helped me get scholarships and work-study grants so that I could go to DU. Grandpa Shaw also sent me $25 a month. At DU, my new piano teacher was Francisco Ibar. He was from New York, and I adored him. At one of my lessons, he boasted, "Last week in New York, I ran into the very famous pianist, Rudolf Serkin, at Pedelson's, and he asked me what tempo I take the slow movement of the Brahms F-sharp minor intermezzo." I was in awe. I mean, Rudolf Serkin? And I asked him, well, what is Pedelson's? "Oh, Cynthia, Pedelson's is just the most important music store in New York. It's right behind Carnegie Hall. You'll go there one day. Oh, and by the way, here is a sheet listing all of the major and minor scales and arpeggios you'll need to know for your graduation jury." I had never seen that before, and I couldn't play my scales and arpeggios. But I could play Brahms. I won the annual concerto competition. But not everyone agreed with that decision. I actually overheard a member of the piano faculty say, "Cynthia should never have won the competition. She always has memory slips. The concert's going to be a disaster." But it wasn't a disaster, and I played beautifully. My mom really liked it. My dad was really quiet. It was in college when I started having major negative thoughts that I wasn't good enough. My world was getting bigger, and so were my insecurities. I mean, I loved playing the piano, but I just felt like no one wanted to listen to me. I mean, my dad didn't. So I threw myself into music. I studied my classical piano, I accompanied singers, I sang in choir, I played piano in percussion ensemble, anywhere where I could play and sing. I had successes, but they were oftentimes undermined by paralyzing nerves, my eyes glazing over, my fingers shaking, memory slips. I was probably having anxiety attacks when I performed. But I had this burning desire to play the piano and to be seen, to be heard, to be wanted, because that's what made me special. That's what set me apart from other people. I was a musician, just like my dad. Mr. Ibar suggested that I should audition for graduate school at his alma mater, the Manhattan School of Music in New York City, and that I should study with his teacher, Doris Zaslavsky. I was honored. I mean, he didn't mention this to any of his other students. I'd never been to New York before, but for some reason, I knew that that's where I belonged. I don't know how I knew that. I don't know, maybe it was that New Yorker magazine from so long ago. I don't know. But I just knew. And I was so excited for my audition. Now, going to New York was huge. In fact, it was so huge that I skipped my college graduation to fly to New York for the audition. My sister Jessie came with me. When we got here, I quickly realized that New York was very different than Pueblo. I mean, for one thing, in New York, everybody walks. In Pueblo, if you're walking down the street, people think that your car is broken and they offer to pick you up. In Pueblo, everybody chats with strangers. In New York, everyone looks around suspiciously and doesn't smile. I wore bright-colored clothes, but everyone in New York was dressed in black, like there was a citywide funeral going on. Men in business suits walked down the street licking ice cream cones. This was a whole different world. I really liked it. So the next day was my audition. Mr. Ibar had arranged for me to practice the piano at his mother-in-law's penthouse apartment. A house, apartment. The maid let us in. There was a maid. I mean, nobody in Pueblo has a maid. And what do I see but a New Yorker magazine? Of course she has a New Yorker. She lives in New York. I hadn't touched the piano for a couple of days, which felt like a lifetime ago. I mean, today was my audition for the Manhattan School of Music, the most important music school in the whole world and where I wanted to be. What if I messed up? I mean, what if they didn't like me? No. They would like me because I was playing Beethoven and I practiced. To the audition. It took us over an hour and we were almost late. I had never walked that far in my life. And by the time we got to the audition room, I was totally exhausted. There at a long table were all of the teachers drinking coffee and eating donuts. I didn't even know which one was my new teacher, Doris Zaslavsky. Hi, I'm Cynthia Shaw, and I'll be playing Beethoven. Oh no, I don't remember how the Beethoven starts. All the teachers are staring at me. Just concentrate. Don't go so fast. Slow down. I should have memorized this better. Slow down. Blink! Pretty! Oh no, they're all staring at me. They hate me! They think I'm awful! Oh my god! They want me to stop! Oh my gosh! Hurry up! Jesse and I flew back to Pueblo, and I had to wait weeks to see whether I was accepted. I didn't get in. I wasn't good enough. My life was over. What was I going to do? Stay in Pueblo and work at McDonald's? I wanted to go where the good teachers were. If I'd had good teachers in Colorado, I would have gotten in right away. And I wanted to go where there was opportunity. I didn't want to be like my dad and stuck in Pueblo for the rest of my life. I wanted to leave Pueblo. I had to get out of Pueblo. I needed to be in New York. And amazingly, my parents let me go. So on a warm September day, I flew to New York. I was so excited. This was going to be my new home. And I wasn't as overwhelmed this time because I had already been in New York. I was on a mission. Study with Doris Zaslavsky, audition again, get into the Manhattan School of Music. I spent a couple of days looking for a place to live. First, I found a room in a Salvation Army home for women that had practice rooms in the boiling hot basement. Well, that was no good. So then I saw a billboard ad for a room in a swingers apartment. No. I wasn't into swingers. So then I decided to live on the Upper West Side, where all of the classical musicians lived. I rented a small studio apartment that was within walking distance of Carnegie Hall. It was about, 100 square feet with beautiful inlaid wood floors and a gigantic bathroom. One of the advantages of the gigantic bathroom was that I could wash my dishes in the bathtub because there was no sink in the little itty-bitty kitchen. The apartment had 2 windows. One faced a brick wall, and the other one on the fire escape was locked with a security gate. There was no key. I mean, heaven forbid there'd be a fire. I mean, I'd be burned to a crisp. In Pueblo, we always had fire drills. The Irish landlady, Mrs. O'Neill, stopped by to welcome me to the building, and she asked me when my furniture was arriving. I told her I didn't have any furniture. So she took me down to the basement that looked like a used furniture store and told me I could borrow whatever I wanted just as long as I returned everything when I moved out. Now I had an apartment, so I had to get a piano. Now, Grandpa Shaw had always promised he would buy me a piano, but I had to get married and settle down first. But I wasn't getting married, and I wasn't settling down, and I would never get married, and I would never settle down. I just needed a piano. Thank goodness my mother convinced him. When the piano arrived, I realized I'd made a huge mistake. It was tall and bulky and big, and it took over half my apartment just there against the wall. But there it was, and I had to practice. Now, I don't know if any of you have actually ever lived next door to a classical pianist, but this is what practicing is like. It's designed to torture your family and your neighbors, anyone within earshot. So first, you play your right hand. Over and over. Then you do the left hand. Romance novels, and he put notes under my door. One of them said, "Cynthia, I'm writing a love scene in my novel, and I just can't get into the mood with all of that playing going on." And it just reminded me of all the people who didn't want to hear me play the piano. My mom, who would vacuum while I was practicing. My dad, who didn't listen. Even our cat Ginger would bite me when I played the piano. Like nobody wanted to hear me play. So I moved the piano across the beautiful inlaid wood floors to the other side, and I stuffed a blanket in the back. I continued practicing. And then there was another note under the door. It just said, "Carpet." So I bought a cheap rug and I put it on the floor, and then I had to move the piano onto the carpeting. Now, you have to imagine that there's a gigantic piano right here, right? Big clunky thing. So I tried pushing it, but it wouldn't move because it was too heavy and the rug was too thick. So then I had this bright idea to lift it up. So I lifted it to move it, and it tipped over. And there it lay, like a beached whale on top of the carpeting in the middle of my small studio apartment. Suddenly there was a note under the door. It said, "What's going on in there?" And then Jim is knocking on the door. He said, "Oh, Cynthia, I have a great idea. What if we have like a red light, green light system? That when it's okay for you to practice, I'll put a green sticker on my door. And when it's not okay for you to practice, I'll put a red sticker on my door." What? And then I moved aside and I showed him the piano. And he took pity on me. And so he and I, together, lifted the piano up, and put it into place. And we were best friends after that. Because it was just in time now, because I had to go to my lesson with Dora Zaslavsky, my new teacher. Now, Dora had been teaching at Manhattan School of Music since the 1920s. She was old and short and plump, with a white streak in her otherwise badly dyed black hair. She kind of looked like a skunk. She wore these long, flowing, loose-fitting dresses that covered up her ample bosoms. She was cultured and sophisticated, but also arrogant and condescending. I played my Bach partita for her. No, Cynthia, you have to play with more passion, more drama. Here, scoot over. Let me show you how it's done. Let me show you how the master plays. You have to make love to the piano. Cynthia, you are not practicing enough. I practiced all the time. Well, as long as there was a green sticker on Jim's door. But I never seemed to be home when Dora would call to check up on me, making sure I was practicing. She did that to all of her students. But she also had these Wednesday night piano soirees in her huge Central Park West apartment where all of her students would play for each other. It was weird. First, we'd have dinner. There would be Dora royally presiding on one end of the table. And then at the other end of the table would be her husband, who had been a famous painter, but who had suffered many strokes and drooled while a nurse fed him. All the other pianists were amazing, but I would get so nervous that I would make lots of mistakes. But there I met Joyce. She was already studying at Manhattan School, and she knew all of the gossip. "Oh, Cynthia, don't take Dora so seriously. She's just trying to impress everybody." At school, they call her the Queen. But one of the great things about meeting all these other classical pianists was that we would all go to Carnegie Hall together to hear famous pianists. We'd sit in the top of the balcony, the cheap seats, the nosebleed section. And after a while, I began to realize that all of the people sitting in that section were classical piano students. Some even brought their scores to follow along. It was so exciting. We'd all be there on the edge of our seats, totally enthralled. There'd be burly Russian pianist Lazar Berman playing Liszt. Petite Spanish pianist Alicia de la Rocha playing Mozart. It was rumored that her hands were so small she could barely reach an octave. Or dreamy Italian pianist Maurizio Pollini playing Schubert. Hearing Vladimir Horowitz play his rousing transcription of John Philip Sousa's Stars and Stripes Forever. I was loving my new life in New York City, but I began asking myself, why do I need to go to graduate school? What am I trying to accomplish? I mean, am I trying to prove something to my father who never left Pueblo and didn't even graduate from college? Did I need to go to graduate school to meet people who would help me and further my career along? I was so innocent, I didn't even know that that was something that people did. But what I did know was that I did not want to go back to Pueblo, and piano was my ticket out. So, at the beginning of December, I had my second Manhattan School audition. I don't even know what I played. It's all a big blur. And then I had to wait a few weeks to see whether I was accepted. Finally, Dora called. Cynthia, you have embarrassed me. You did not get into school. I can no longer have you as a student. You do not belong in New York. I thought maybe I should just call home and see if somebody could help me, encourage me. But my mom wasn't there, so I spoke to my dad. And even before I could tell him about Dora and the audition, he started rattling on about all his music jobs. He was trying to impress me. When I finally got a word edgewise, he said, "Oh, Cynthia, I'm sure you'll figure it out." He didn't want to hear that I was struggling, that I was having a hard time being a musician in New York, that I needed his help and his guidance. I needed him. So I called Joyce. She said, "Oh, Cynthia, call the president of Manhattan School and have him recommend another teacher." He recommended Solomon Makowski, but I decided to wait until I got back because I was going to visit my family for Christmas. When I got back to Pueblo, my mom said, "Cynthia, you need to return home to Pueblo. New York is not the place for you." I didn't know what else to do, so I flew back to New York to return the borrowed furniture to Mrs. O'Neill, sell the old piano, and leave New York for good. I walked into my small studio apartment, closed the door, and just stood there in the dark, looking around. And all of a sudden it hit me. This is my apartment. This is where I live. I'm not going home to Pueblo. I am home. I immediately called Mr. Makowski and arranged a lesson for the next day. When I got there, he asked me, "Do you know your scales and arpeggios?" Of course I didn't know my scales and arpeggios. I'd been avoiding them my entire life. He said, "You need them." He wasn't flamboyant like Mr. Ibar or dramatic like Dora Zaslavsky. He was all nuts and bolts, black and white, straightforward. I finally found the right teacher. I studied with him for about 6 months. It felt like starting all over again. But he cared about me, and he encouraged me. He was a musical father I never had. Finally, I had my third Manhattan School audition. This time, I was really prepared. Hi, I'm Cynthia Shaw, and I'll be playing Brahms. I was staying in New York. Even though being at Manhattan School was very hard for me, and I felt like everybody was so much better than me, I did get my master's degree from the Manhattan School of Music, the most important music school in the world. I was determined to believe in myself and to not let others bring me back to safety or diminish my dream. I knew to move on when Dora wasn't the right teacher for me. I didn't return to Pueblo when my mom said I should. And even though I loved my dad, and I know he loved me, I loved me more. His struggle was my struggle, to be heard. But I had to do it my own way, away from my family and in a competitive, culturally alive place where I could be free. I mean, I still have my self-destructive demons telling me I'm not good enough and no one wants to listen to me. It doesn't just magically disappear. But I realize that as we all go through our lives trying to find our own creative voice and express ourselves, that there is always hope. Always.